I'm Lisa, Barefoot Pampered Chef. Apparently I'm going to be home a lot more now. So I wanted to make a couple of things for you guys. I know everyone's stuck at home with kids and just different breakfast ideas. So we're going to make two different kinds of waffles that my son loves. They're actually called Chaffles, and they're more of a keto-based waffle. They're keto because they're really low in carb. My son has a little bit of a liver issue, and so we're working on a lower carb diet for him. And so these two different waffles are lower carb. So I'll show you how to make those. The other thing that I'm going to make is not low carb at all, but it happens to be my son's favorite, my dad's favorite, my boyfriend's favorite. We're going to make biscuits and gravy. So it's a little bit of a different play on gravy because I don't like sausage. So we're going to make a bacon gravy. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to make chaffles. So what I'm going to do, I haven't plugged this in yet, but I'll show you. I have a little tiny mini waffle maker. These makes perfect size minis for the kids. You can use a regular size waffle maker, not a problem. I'm going to let that heat up while I'm mixing this. And I'm just going to spray on some spray. So I use an olive oil based spray just because I like olive oil. You can use whatever kind of spray you want there. So the first one we're going to make is my son's favorite. It's called a chaffle, but it's a chocolate chaffle. Say that 10 times fast. So what I have in here is an ounce of cream cheese and 1 tablespoon of dark cocoa powder. So that's in there. Hold on a minute. So I'm going to add to that 1 egg. And then in there, I'm also going to add 2 tablespoons of almond flour. So you can get almond flour anywhere. I usually have it sitting here, but it's just in a bag. 2 tablespoons of almond flour, 2 teaspoons of a sweetener. So I use Truvia. You can use Swerve, which is a low carb sweetener. You can use regular sugar if you're not worried about the carbs as much. And then there's also 1 teaspoon of vanilla in here. So the whole entire recipe, which is a fairly simple recipe, is 1 egg, 1 ounce of cream cheese, 2 tablespoons of almond flour, 1 tablespoon of cocoa, 2 teaspoons of whatever sweetener you choose, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So you're going to mix this up really well. Sometimes it takes a little bit to get the cream cheese to mix in with you, but if you use a softer cream cheese or room temperature cream cheese, that helps. Now this little batch is enough for Aiden for the morning. This is going to make 2 of these little waffles, so that's a perfect batch for him. So I'm going to get this all nice and mixed in here. Like I said, usually it's the cream cheese that gives you a hard time. Alright. So we're pretty good and mixed up there. I'm going to rinse off my spoon here because I'm going to use that for the next chaffle, and I don't want that one chocolatey. So what we're going to do is just pour this into our waffle maker. I'm going to set this off to the side because, like I said, that makes 2 of these, and we're going to let that sit for a second. While we're letting that sit, I'm going to make a plain chaffle. So these plain chaffles are awesome. You can make them, instead of making them into waffles, both the chocolate and the plain ones, you can make them on the griddle as a pancake. But the plain ones are great for sandwiches. So what I'm going to do is I have 1 tablespoon of mayo, regular mayo. In here I have 3 tablespoons of almond flour, 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of water. And I am going to add to that 1 egg. Yes, it's smoking over here. Don't smoke, it's bad for you. Unless it's food, then it's okay. So I'm gonna mix this up. So we've got 1 egg, 3 tablespoons of almond flour, 1 tablespoon of mayo, 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of water. So this one mixes up a little bit easier because the mayo is easier to mix up. Let me grab a fork really quick. Because I'm going to take this waffle out with a fork. So, I mean, that was like less than a minute. And we've got a great looking little chocolate waffle there that is perfect for the kiddos. So I'm just going to set that to the side. Now those chocolate chaffles and these regular chaffles, what I do is I make a whole big batch on the weekend, or, you know, if you're in quarantine and you're really super bored, and you put them in either a little bit of parchment paper or wax paper, and then you can put those layered into a plastic baggie, throw them in the freezer. So you can just grab one, pop it in the toaster, pop it in the microwave, pop it on a skillet, even pop it back in the waffle maker for a few seconds, and it's going to warm up, and it's going to be really nice and good for like a egg and cheese sandwich, egg, cheese, and bacon sandwich. So this is the consistency of that plain chaffle. So you just pour that in. So again, a low carb waffle. These taste great. I mean, my 9-year-old eats them. Come on, you saw him like chowing down on popcorn the other day. So I'm gonna let that sit for just a second here. While that's started, I'm gonna make sure that my oven is set on 400 because we're actually gonna make some pan biscuits, really easy pan biscuits. So you don't have to do all that cutting, kneading, anything like that. So you can make them ahead of time, have them in your refrigerator, and just pop them into the microwave for the kids in the morning. So this is going here, and it should almost be done. They don't take very long at all. And again, that chaffle recipe will make 2 of these mini waffles. So for the chocolate chaffles, it's 1 egg, 1 ounce of cream cheese, 2 tablespoons of almond flour, 1 tablespoon of cocoa, 2 teaspoons of sweetener, and a teaspoon of vanilla. For the regular chaffles, it's 1 egg, 3 tablespoons of almond flour, 1 tablespoon of mayo, 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of water. So, I mean, you can just warm these up any way you can. When you know, I've warmed them up in the toaster oven before, the oven. Whatever you use to warm things up, it's going to be just fine. So this is how this plain chaffle looks. I mean, come on, doesn't that look awesome? Wouldn't that look great with a little bit of an egg and bacon and some cheese on it? You know? And I mean, it took 1 minute to make. And it's low carb. Really, low carb. I'm going to unplug this so I don't like end up burning myself at some point. And just push it back here. So now we're going to make our biscuits. So the first thing with the biscuits is we're going to do our dry ingredients. So these are really, really easy biscuits. Really easy. So it's going to be 2 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. So those 2 are different. Know the difference. One has more ingredients than the other one does. So then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar or Truvia or Swerve or whatever sugar sweetener that you use, and a dash of salt. When anything I see calls for a dash of something, for me it means that it's a little bit less than 1/8 of a teaspoon and it's hard to measure. I add salt more for flavoring, but with baking you do want to be careful because it can throw off your balance of ingredients. So, dry ingredients. 2 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and a dash of salt. All right. Now, for biscuits, you want to put your butter in. but you want to do what's called cutting the butter in. Now, I looked around and for the life of me could not find my pastry cutter. So I am going to use one of my little items from Pampered Chef, which is it's called the Mix and Chop. So you can use a fork. Fork is fine. And I'm actually going to cut that butter into small enough chunks in the flour and get the flour all over me because that's how you cook. And if Aiden was here, I'd have it all over him. But what you're doing is you're making that butter distribute throughout your dry ingredients. Now, if I was really doing this baking, I would have sifted those ingredients. But this is just kind of for a quick biscuit recipe for a couple of people that I'm feeding anyway. So you want to cut in this butter until the butter is in almost like pea-size pieces in your mixture. Maybe a little bit smaller than pea size. So it may take just a little bit, but this is just that extra amount of love that you're doing to make these biscuits amazing. So while I'm cutting this up, I'm just going to keep chopping here. As you can see, it's kind of cutting, it's a little bit more granular, and the butter is broken up. So that was a half of a cup of butter, so one whole stick of butter. And I've got a greased cake pan over here. You can use a greased pot pan if you have one. I just happen to have bought the store out of those at one point. For some reason I was making cakes, and so I have tons of them. All right, so my butter is pretty much cut up. I'm gonna get rid of that and bring out my stirrer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm gonna add buttermilk. Don't have buttermilk? I didn't have buttermilk either. So what I always do, first of all, there's a couple of things that you can do if you don't have buttermilk. First, I always keep this on hand, or some other powdered stuff that I buy in bulk from the Amish. This is powdered buttermilk, so you can use this with water in place of the buttermilk. I'm actually not using that today because I wanted to show you another trick as well. So I've got 3/4 of a cup of milk here, and it's just plain milk, regular milk. To make buttermilk, I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of vinegar. Buttermilk. Buttermilk is just a soured milk, so this is a soured milk. You add vinegar. So we're going to take this mixture, we're going to add that to our dry ingredients, and this is our dough. You might at some point have to use your hands in this mixture, but really you don't want to work it too hard because the more you work your biscuits, the tougher they're going to get. The less you work them, the flakier they are. So I'm just going to kind of very gently work this together. So just kind of flip and turn until it starts sticking all together and I get everything off the bottom. And then I don't even have to throw my hands into this one because it mixed up rather well. I'm going to take my greased pan, plop that down in the center there. And I'm going to kind of work this out to the edge gently. Like I said, you don't want to work it too much because you don't want chewy biscuits. You want nice and fluffy biscuits. So I've kind of worked that out to the edge there. I'm going to wash my hands here a second. Always have your prep sink near you. If you don't have a prep sink, always have a prep bowl. Something that you can throw all of your stuff into, and then when you're not cleaning up as you go, you can clean up at the end, but it's still not all over the place. And I always keep a towel right near me. So we're going to take this and we're going to pop it in the oven at 400 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes. So while that's cooking, I'll show you what they look like when they're done. So this is that biscuit when it's done, nice and golden brown. And we're gonna make some bacon gravy to go over top of that. So I've got my pan here over on the stove. I'm gonna turn my heat on to about a medium. Now, we talked about when we were making the macaroni and cheese about making a roux. Gravies are made with a roux. So this roux happens to be bacon fat and flour. So I've got, every time I make bacon, I save the bacon fat. Really easy to save, throw it in a glass container, throw it in your fridge. I happened to make some bacon that was called Heaven and Hell bacon today. So this Heaven and Hell bacon has a red tint to it because it actually is very, very spicy, and they use a red kind of a spice on the outside of it. I'm just looking for something to stir this with. So I've got 3 tablespoons of a regular bacon grease and 1 tablespoon of my spicy bacon grease. So this is going to be kind of a spicy bacon gravy. And I'm going to put this in my pan to kind of melt down a little bit. And we're going to add 4 tablespoons of flour. So when you add the flour, oh my gosh, I have flour all over me, to the grease, that is your roux. What you're doing is you're essentially thickening whatever gravy you're making with the flour, but by making the roux first, you're cooking the raw flour taste out of it. So I'll try to pick this up here and show you guys how quickly that melted down in there. So that's all melted bacon grease and some flour. So it's nice and melty. We're gonna let that cook just for a few minutes until I'm pretty satisfied that the raw flour taste is cooked out of it. While we're doing that, I want to show you over here, I have 2 cups of milk. That's going to be our gravy component. And then I have some bacon over here. You can use as much or as little as you want, that I'm going to add to the gravy at the end to give it a little bit more of that flavor. So my bacon grease is bubbling up a little bit, which to me means that my flour's probably cooked through enough. And I'm going to add in my milk. Now you're going to want to bring this milk up to a little bit of a boil, or like almost a simmer, and it's going to start to thicken, and that's the flour thickening it. If you use a little bit too much milk or too much or too little flour, you can add a little bit more thickener in the end. I would suggest maybe using a cornstarch instead of a flour, just because it doesn't have as much of a raw taste to it. I added the whole 2 cups at one time. You can add them, 1 cup at a time and see if you can thicken it a little bit more that way. But this should thicken up pretty well. And then we're going to add our bacon to it. So I'm going to let that come up to a boil a little bit. I'm going to add in some cracked black pepper. Personally, I don't think you can ever have enough cracked black pepper. And I'm going to add in a pinch of salt. So I've said on here before that I make my own flavored salt. So again, this is just a jar that has sea salt in it. And I've put in a stick of rosemary. And the rosemary is going to flavor that salt as it goes. So it is a rosemary flavored salt. This looks like it's wanting to come up to a little bit of a bubble here. All right, well, we'll rehash things quickly while that comes up to a bubble. So we've made kind of 3 different breakfasts today, but you can use the one ingredient for a whole bunch of different things. So we've got our chocolate chaffles. And these, like I said, put in some parchment paper, layer them, put them in a plastic baggie, throw them in the freezer. You can pop them in the toaster. You can warm them up on a skillet. My son, I put 1 or 2 chocolate chips on them. He loves it. They're really good for kids. You could probably make a sandwich out of these. So like a chocolate sandwich, maybe put some Nutella in there, perhaps some fruit. Strawberries would probably taste really good with this. Even a low-carb cheesecake mix would kind of make this a little bit more of an upscale breakfast. So that recipe is 1 egg, 1 ounce of cream cheese, 2 tablespoons of almond flour, 1 tablespoon of cocoa, 2 teaspoons of a sweetener, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. The next thing we made is the plain chaffle. So this is a plain kind of a waffle. You can eat it as a waffle. You can make a sandwich out of it. So you can put an egg, avocado would taste really good on here, some cheese and bacon. You can make that a low carb thing. You can also do these with the parchment paper and freeze them. You can actually make an egg, cheese, and bacon sandwich or whatever kind of sandwich you want. Wrap them in parchment paper or freezer paper if you have it. Pop them in a plastic baggie, and you can freeze them as a whole sandwich as well, and then heat them up that way. So that's a good idea for kids. You know, if they're old enough, they can grab this, they can heat it up themselves. You don't have to worry about them while you're on quarantine. And these are really easy to make. 1 egg, 3 tablespoons of almond flour, 1 tablespoon of mayo, 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of water. So that's that. Then we made our biscuits, which are in the oven right now. And that is 2 cups of flour, 1½ teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 2 tablespoons of sugar, a dash of salt, cut in a cup of butter, a 1/2 cup of butter, sorry, so 1 stick of butter, and then 3/4 cup of buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk, use the powdered buttermilk. If you don't have powdered buttermilk, then you can use the 3/4 cup of milk plus 1½ tablespoons of vinegar, and that will make your buttermilk. And now we're on to the bacon gravy. 4 tablespoons of bacon grease. Now you can make regular gravy with just butter. You can make it with butter. You can make it with the pan drippings from your sausage. So that's your sausage gravy. So it's 4 of that fat. So 4 tablespoons of your fat. So we're using bacon fat. Plus 4 tablespoons of flour. So that's your thickening agent. Cook that down into a roux. And then you add 2 cups of milk. And as you see, look at how thick that got. See how it's coating the back of my spoon? So this is actually all done. And I'm going to throw in, I don't know, I've got probably about a couple of tablespoons of bacon there. I'm going to throw that in, mix it in. So you've got this lovely, thick bacon gravy. And we're going to put that over top of our homemade pan biscuits, which only about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes in a 400-degree oven. So hopefully you guys like this breakfast. I'm going to be really bored over the next week, and I have tons of ingredients. So if you guys have more ideas of what you want me to make, let me know. I do have a kid. I have a picky eater. So, you know, I can come up with ideas that way for veggies, anything like that. Let me know. Have a good quarantine, and I'll hopefully see you all again on the other side. Thanks. Bye.